Hello, folks. Welcome to our final panel for this SGDA summit. Thank you all for coming by and being such a great audience. We're here for the engineering panel. I'm here joined by Jessica Wei and Ted Dinola. If you all would like to introduce yourselves, feel free to go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm currently a software engineer at Maxis, um, and I've been here for about a year, so I'm still relatively new. Um, and I guess as a disclaimer, as legal required me to just say this, everything I'll talk about on this panel is going to be about my general experience in game dev. So nothing I say will be specifically about EA or Maxis. So I apologize if I can't like get into the weeds about some of my examples.
Hi, folks. I'm Ted Dinola. I was formerly, primarily a developer working on games across studios large and small. And I use that experience now at Meta, where I provide deep dive technical and design guidance to people that are bringing titles to the Quest store. Just like Jessica, I am not here representing Meta in any capacity. I cannot answer your questions about the Quest hardware, highlight or any titles you may have heard of, but I will be talking about my time as a developer and as an engineer. Nice to meet you all.
Awesome. With that, we'll go ahead and get started and go ahead and ask a very easy one to start off with. What first made you interested in game development, and why have you stayed in the game development industry?
Oh, I can take that first. Um, well, I kind of already grew up with video games since I was small. So I've kind of always wanted to do something related in games, but wasn't quite I didn't quite know like game development was a profession until high school where we had like a career fair and someone from Pixie Hollow as a designer actually came in and talked to us about it. And by that time I've already like gotten into software development. So I was like taking CS courses and stuff. But I was like, oh dang, that's a job. I'm like, maybe comps like do like something in games, and like of course it could. So like I was able to start that journey when I basically hit the ground in undergrad um, and joined like a game dev club. What made me stay, I suppose, is it's partially I haven't been here for that long, so I'm still like, I don't know, in the honeymoon phases or something. But I do really enjoy working with like all of the different disciplines, so like design, sound, music, art, um, and basically everyone has like a very creative vibe that I enjoy working with. So hopefully I'll be here for a while.
And yeah, what got me started and why did I stay here? It was a long time ago, so let me think. I've always liked games. I did a little bit of tinkering and coding as a kid, but the game that really made me realize, like, oh, hey, I kind of want to build these things for a living was 1999's Homeworld. And that's for three reasons. One, I played the heck out of it and found a really great community. Two, I really started digging into like looking at like why it felt as good as it did, and like the unique design and narrative. I thought was really interesting the way they built things out. But then three, it also used Lua for all their data structures, and so I was able to get to the modding scene. And initially just using it how the other modding scene members were using it, which is just like, cool, I'm going to make a map manually or change some variables. But then realizing that Lua was programmatic, like really was able to do some really cool stuff, like put in various functions to generate materials in the field, and got hooked. At that point, I was like, oh, I think I really like this. About 10 years after that, when it was time to choose a degree, I told my parents I wanted to get into game development, and they're like, that's not a real job. So I studied physics for about 4 years, and realized that while I loved this subject, didn't want to do it professionally, and did a cold call email to the developer of a game that I really liked at the time called Sword of the Stars and said, hey, do you need a warm body? And he said, can you be here in 2 weeks? And I spent 6 months interning. My compensation was tea and a place to stay. And I was like, yeah, I love this. This is being able to build things and change things on the fly and see immediate effect and drive gameplay in that way was super cool. And then, while I originally wanted to get into games for design, I ended up getting a degree in computer science. So I got to be a programmer. And while that wasn't my original love, I enjoyed it enough and I've gotten quite good at it. And it's really useful to be able to understand that side of it deeply because it's where we enable, things to really happen. Why have I stuck with this? Masochism. No. I think, for those of you who are going through this, hopefully you're coming to this with the understanding that the skill sets you are building are, highly technical and can be applied to many other areas. And so hopefully the reason you're in games is because there's something inside of you that wouldn't let you not do it. Because this is a field that you get into because you really care about either facilitating game creation or getting into the guts of it yourself. Games are a massive overlap of art and technology, and if you're not thrilled about that, it probably will keep going. But if it's at your core, nothing's going to let you go. This is the type of industry where people stick around because they love what they do, and that's why I'm here to this day.
I wholeheartedly agree. I have done this I've been doing this kind of like in a lot of game projects for like 1 year in grad school, and I'm like, oh no, I can never not do this. This is where I'm going to be.
It's really funny news because I remember after graduation, a lot of the folks that went with me to games were like, oh yeah, I'll do this for a couple years and then I'll hop off into something more stable like finance. And I was like, I don't understand that at all. Why would you be even starting in this if you weren't like, it's got to be games?
Yeah. Awesome. For our next question, I'd like to ask, what skills do you value most in yourself as well as in your teammates? So anybody who would be working with you.
I'll grab this one and pass it off. So I was thinking about this question, and I kind of want to highlight there's 3 different major skill areas that I imagine for being a successful engineer in this field. The first one I'm going to call fundamental knowledge. That is basically working on your problem solving skills, working on your understanding, being able to look at a problem, understand what tools are going to help you get to a solution, or being able to take an existing solution and understand how to modify that to adapt to your specific needs for whatever project you're working on. So that's number 1. Number 2, I'll just call knowledge skills. And that's really just hitting the books. That's when you have a new project, being able to learn and deep dive into a new technology, whether that's going through huge amounts of spec if you're low level, or like doing deep tutorialization and learning on whatever engine or tool set you're working for and building those skills up. That one is something that is harder to retain, and what you'll find is that you kind of like relearn stuff over and over again as you use it, but getting good at being able to do that type of work is critical. And then number 3, and the most important one for teamwork and really for long-term success, a lot of folks think of them as soft skills, but I don't think that's true. I just call them social skills. That is the ability to lean on and rely on other people in your team, whether that's other people with different expertise in engineering, or being able to understand other disciplines and how you can work with them, what their limitations are, what their strengths are, how you can help them be maximally successful. And that third one is probably one of the hardest ones to cultivate because it really requires you to potentially explore areas that aren't your core interests. But if you get good at being able to think broadly, even while you focus deeply, that will see you very, very far and make you a really solid team member because you'll be able to communicate with each other very effectively. Jessica.
Yeah, totally agree on all 3 counts, actually. I would say that the one at the top of my list was going to be social skills. And I feel like in that sense, you could be like the best programmer ever in the world. You could be like the most adaptive. You can learn all these things in like 2 seconds or whatever. But I feel like if you're, it's really important to be able to communicate across different team members, especially when in game development, you're working with all these different disciplines. So everyone has their own kind of like lingo and different levels of understanding. And so it's really important to be able to like build the skill set to be able to communicate all of your ideas clearly and make sure that when you work with all these other different disciplines that like no one's getting lost or like misunderstanding, which misunderstandings will happen, but being able to also kind of talk around that and discuss that to kind of mitigate the impact that the misunderstanding might have had is really important. I will also agree on like the adaptability part, because I won't say that it's going to be always the case, but there's going to be a lot of cases where you're working with pre-existing like libraries or tools or engines, for example, and maybe they're not all like this most up-to-date state of the art thing, because maybe you're working on like a older product, right? Then you want to be able to learn to read other people's code and make sense of it, and to kind of understand what kind of risks would happen if you were to dabble in that old code, for example, and how to fix these bugs. Yeah.
On that last little bit, I want to kind of reveal one of the great lies of engineering as a field, which is that it's hard and inscrutable. No, it's not. If you've been doing coding, you've learned code is actually pretty easy. It just does what you want it to do as long as the syntax is correct. What's hard is knowing how to use that code effectively. And then even harder is being able to understand that just because you have some esoteric knowledge, other folks that you're working with, especially because other disciplines, have their own esoteric knowledge that you won't know. And it's when we work together that we're able to achieve really awesome stuff. So focus on that teamwork stuff. It's absolutely critical. The 10x engineer joke, that guy is almost useless for a team because he has no time of day for anybody else in his team. I'd rather work with someone that may take a little longer to build things, but we'll build it right and build it with teammates, thoughts and opinions in mind.
Definitely. It's one thing to be able to like code something entirely by yourself, but you're not going to be working by yourself. You're going to be working with other people no matter what. So being able to do that is very important. And communication especially. Oh man, communication. Um, for my next question, I'd like to ask, there are a lot of specialties in the field of engineering. How should somebody go about finding and learning what it is that they enjoy? So like gameplay programming, AI programming, technical art. How can they go about finding that?
Jessica, you want to start this one?
Sure, yeah. My advice, which I think you need the luxury of time for, is to be able to go into several different projects, each as those different disciplines. I know it's hard to ask for, especially from students in college. You're balancing school life and projects all at once. Like, I understand that that's not the most realistic, but I would say it's the most ideal way to go about it, because only having like on-hand experience will you know if you actually enjoy and are interested in this particular subject, right? For a more realistic answer, which I think would also work, I think is if you take the time, maybe like once a month or once every 2 months, to go and like either just have like a day where you either learn about it, like go through a tutorial about, for example, like let's say if you want to do graphics, right? You go through a tutorial going through like a really well-used library, which the name is slipping from my mind right now. I apologize. So you can go through that tutorial and see how you like it, if you understand it, and if it's something that you want to expand on, right? Or you could go through, for example, Udemy courses. And if you can, which is nice, but it requires a little bit more outreach, if you can like find someone who works in that field and kind of get a perspective on what their day-to-day life is like, working as this particular engineer, I think would be really nice. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Ted?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of what you just said. And I kind of want to talk about, there's this one guy on LinkedIn, I won't say their name, but their posts are very popular. And a few months back, they made a post that I was like, I don't want to crush this guy's joy, but I need to respond to this because this person has spent their entire career in AAA. And AAA is just one part of the field and has very specific needs and wants. And he had posted this almost like Linnaean classification of the roles you should be looking for in the industry. And so what he had was like, you had designer, and then under that narrative designer, level designer, et cetera. You had engineer under that gameplay and system, et cetera. And I saw this, I was like, ooh, this is only good for teams that are 300 plus. And the way that I always look at things is that our skills are very much a radiograph. And that's both outside of a discipline, but also within it. And so I always encourage people to be as T-shaped as possible. Don't try to just hyper specialize into one thing, because then you never know if something just around the corner or just to the left or right of you is more interesting to you. So while you're focusing on the specializations you will need at your job, because especially when you get into the industry, you will be given something to do and you need to get quite good at that. make sure you're staying open to trying things outside of that. Make sure you're learning as much as possible about other areas, and be open to jump onto things that are outside your comfort zone, because you might find out you love it. And this is just going to be critical throughout your whole career. I'll talk a little bit more towards the end of this, but remember, right now, you have an idea in your head about what you want to be. And that's just a guess. You'll never know until you try things that are closer to it. And so as you constantly test those things, always be looking for, oh, what about this? What about that? What about this? That's how you really build a career. That's how you stay in it longer. And that's also how you find this hypothetical ideal job that you want to do forever.
Those are, yeah, you really can't know what you like or dislike until you really try it, because, and definitely, like, you can find game projects, go to game jams. I think game jams are a great way for students especially to be able to get that experimentation without having something that's very high stakes, because you don't want to volunteer for a project, uh like a paid gig on something that you have zero experience with. Game jams are a really good way. SGDA is hoping to host one later this year, so if you're interested in trying your programming skills out, swing by there. Advertising finished now. My next question is, what technical skills would you say are the most in demand right now in the field?
So I'll grab this one. This is constantly shifting. I would also say be careful about targeting what is currently, quote, in demand, because that changes very rapidly. I think what you need to do is be flexible. Right now, however, some things we're seeing are being an engine expert is much more important now than being like an engine builder. So being able to have deep knowledge around how to build things in Unreal, how to build things for Unity, those are really what the majority of the industry uses right now, unless you're at a company that has its own in-house engine, in which case, good luck. You will be learning something very specific that only works for that one job, and that's fine, but realize that will not be transferable. So that's one. Things that are in vogue right now, if you are interested in AI, especially Gen AI and LLM usage, absolutely do a little project on it, get into it, because right now there's going to be lots of positions opening up about how to integrate Gen AI with games. But realize that about 5 years ago, the job that was like that was Web3, and we all see how that's going. I would say it's better to go for your interests and get really good at things you care about than to try and chase the market. That said, make sure you're constantly being exposed to like any new methodologies or technologies that are coming online, so that you're able to pivot when you need to, because you never know. Like with Gen AI, who knows? Maybe gameplay engineering is going out the door. It will all be Blueprint in 5 years. Who knows? Just be cautious. Jessica, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree. I would also like to tack on maybe like depending on what you want to get into for an engineering field. Let's take tech art, for example, right? I would also encourage that you go and learn the tools that the artist would use while they're making stuff for your project, right? So for example, let's say like, yeah, if you're doing tech art, you want to be able to understand what your 3D modelers want to, or how their like workflow is like, right? So you'd want to get yourself familiar with how Maya works or how Blender works, and I think that would like really contribute, at least in the game dev industry, just because we're so spread out multidisciplinary wise. But yeah, otherwise, I don't have too much to add on that, very much because of how much the demand of skills shift at all times. But yeah, just be adaptable.
Also, one thing that I think everyone should spend time learning, because it's so important and most teams don't know how to do it, learn how to do performance profiling, learn how to do graphics inspection. This is not something you have to be very good at. There are a couple great tools you can use that will help you. I was just joking with Jessica, reveal your sins, and it will save you hours and hours of time when you're like, I need to get X number more frames and I can't figure it out. Cool. You fire the thing, you see, oh, I have this one object that's being drawn that's massive. Please learn how to do that, because one thing that'll help you so much is if you do performance optimization like early and often, then you're never going to be out of perf, and you won't be stuck 2 months before a deadline trying to get back an extra 3 or 4 milliseconds of frame.
I sincerely hope that the graphics, or the not having to do scripting anymore, doesn't, because I've spent a lot of time in that scripting and I've gotten very used to it. But definitely keeping that adaptability feels very, very important because you really never know. It's hard to predict with technology and games what is going to be relevant in 5 years versus what isn't. There's probably things that I have never even touched that were thought to be the next big thing. That I'm just like, that's fine. For our next question, I would like to ask, what this is related to career now, what should somebody do to excel when they're first starting out a new job, first starting out in the games industry? Because that first job can often be the most daunting and the most frustrating.
Yeah, I'll hop into that. You just need to dive in. It's going to be scary, but like the first week at your job, get to know people that you work with directly and the people that your team most work with directly, and ask them what they do. Ask them what their day-to-day is. Ask them what their needs are. Obviously, at the same time, like if you do not work at a company that has a good onboarding module, try to work with whoever your management is and get like, hey, I need to know what are all the tools we use, how do I, use the source, etc. What are some things we're doing on? And then as early as possible, try to get one project that you can start taking on immediately that lets you touch different parts of the code base. You want to familiarize yourself as quickly as possible so that you can really get an understanding. But that ingratiation, that understanding who does what, who you need to go to if you have questions is critical. Don't be afraid to ask questions, especially when you're starting out in a new position, because that's what people are there for. They want to get you spun up as quickly as possible. And it's important that you show an interest and also get that understanding of the lay of the land. It'll help you move much more quickly. If, for example, your first task has you touching a system and you know who's consuming that system, what's using it, you can just ask them rather than trying to dig through the source code on yourself, potentially adding days to however long it's going to take you to build something.
Yeah, I also have ask questions on my list, which I want to really, I guess, highlight because you're starting new, right? So you're not going to be necessarily expected to know day one how everything works, like not even just the code base, but there's so many other tools that they might be using that you need to take the time to familiarize yourself with. And sometimes maybe you're lucky they'll have documentation on it. Sometimes it'll be up to date. Sometimes it won't be up to date. So the best way is hopefully when you get onboarded, you have someone there who's like your go-to asked for questions person, right? So you need to be comfortable with asking them questions, even if they feel like they're dumb, because they're not dumb questions, especially because you're learning this for the first time. So being able to be comfortable with that idea and not being afraid to approach people, even if they're not like your go-to person, even to stretch out to other disciplines, ask about, oh dang, what are you doing? Like, what does engineering help for you, right? And I would also say, if you can, to try to make as many opportunities as for yourself as possible, because those won't necessarily passively come by you all the time. So if you go into your first job and let's say maybe you were also interested in like the sound engineering part of stuff, right? I would recommend like reaching out to like sound people and be like, hey, what's your day-to-day like? Like what would an engineer be able to do to help you, for example, like implement your sound of the game, or like all of those other things. So I guess mainly ask people, talk to people if you can. I know it's a little bit harder with people working from home now, I think. But that's also been my norm, so it's
Yeah, I want to
possible.
take a minute to add on because you raised some really good points there. I want to talk a little bit about what work is actually like, what work owes you. You owe work getting the stuff you're assigned done. Anything you do beyond that is awesome, but you should be getting something out of that. What work owes you is not just compensation, but also opportunity to grow, opportunity to discover and learn things. Especially early in your career, it's going to be critical for you to find mentorship in fields, near to the things you're interested in. And like Jessica was saying, those opportunities, very rarely, as long as you're getting your work done, very rarely are people going to be disappointed if you chip in on something a little bit neighbor to what you're working on. And that's how you can find yourself into really cool work streams. So do your best to try and pay attention to what other people are working on. If you see something you think you can help with, you'd like to learn, hop in. If people are doing brown bags, attend those things. If people are doing little quick seminars on what they're working on, hop into those things. And if you're having problems because you end up working remotely, don't be afraid to schedule like little one-on-one coffee chats with people to pick their brains about how they work at the company, how they do their best work, and how they can work with you and your team.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Just questions are going to help you more than just kind of trying to bang your head against the wall and figure it out on your own, because if you don't know, you don't know. And I found that a lot of, especially in games, people are willing to help you out where you need it. They're not going to be judgy. They want to help you out. They want to make something great with you. For our next
One
question.
last thing on
Oh,
this
yes,
real
go for it.
fast. For a lot of you, this will be your first job in this industry. You're going to learn more in your first year actually building games in official context than you will have during your entire education so far. Be open to that, but also understand that everyone knows that. Everyone you're working with, they hire you because they're investing time. They want you to be capable of contributing, and they're more than happy to help out. So don't feel afraid. If you don't know something, that's great. It's an opportunity to learn. So don't shut yourself off. Make sure to take advantage of those connections you're going to be building during your first couple months.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. For our next question, I'd like to ask, what are your thoughts or experiences with crunch and maintaining a healthy work-life balance? Just the physical reaction said a story there.
I was doing tasks back and forth, but I don't want to take this one before I lose this emotional state. Let me do a little bit of story time. About 2 years ago, I was in Melbourne for a developer conference, and I got invited by a friend that runs the Game Workers Union there. I gave a little talk on my time in the industry up to that point. And the short version of that is, over the first 10 years of my career, I worked at lots of different companies, and each of them was, I'll avoid cursing, messed up in their own unique way. And I thought it was normal. And I loved what I was doing, but I left little pieces of soul behind where I was. Some of those were crunch, some of those were bad management, some of those were inefficiencies, etc. So yeah, our industry is a little bit of a passion farm. They will make you do things if you get onto a bad team that you won't really be expecting yourself to do. Realize that crunch is not necessarily required for this process. If you are being asked to do things that are above and beyond, kind of do that temperature check. And if it seems consistent, if it seems that the company just really sees you as a resource and not as a teammate, start looking for places where you can actually grow. Because crunch, and to be fair, I'm not talking about doing a month of crunch before a major milestone or like a preview for a game thing. I'm talking about long sustained crunch. If you're seeing that as something that your company runs, get out, because it will kill your passion for this field faster than anything else. And I think any of us that have been in there for a while, we've seen droves of people leave. Once you pass that 5-6 year mark, it's a skeleton crew left from the start. Crunch is bad. Crunch is not required. And if you're on a smaller team, I recommend if you see crunch happening, Richard Lemershon, who's one of your professors, wrote a great book called A Playful Production Process. Hand that to your producer, because it talks about ways that you can definitely build production process that does not require crunch.
Yeah, I agreed on all counts, actually. I think crunch is a lot easier to be done, I guess, as a university student, especially when you're on your own schedule making games. I had to learn it the hard way. I burnt out after undergrad. So learning it the hard way is like the wake-up call that made me be like, okay, I need to pace myself. I can't work on projects till 12 a.m. even if I'm like maybe playing games in the middle of like 6 to 12, right? So kind of, I guess the advice I'd give there is even though you're not on a schedule, put yourself on a strict schedule so that you can kind of define, these are my working hours, whether they're like 2 hours or 4 hours a day, but at least you'll have that block of time where you sit down and you focus and you work on that project. Well, obviously, if you're employed, it's 8 hours a day, right? And it's easier to set the boundaries, especially now that I have like a start and end time where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get up to do work, and people can contact me at this time frame. And after I log off, I have like my Slack notifications, my email notifications, they're all just turned off, and I'm not going to look at them until the next day. So it really helps to set boundaries so that you don't get into like a bad habit of subconsciously checking and always like being in like, oh, I need to do game dev kind of mindset, because that's going to lead to a really bad burnout. So try not to do that.
Yeah, folks, burnout is very real. Learn to recognize symptoms of it, because if you get hit by a full burnout, it's not just like, oh, I'll take a vacation and come back to this. Burnout will take you out of being productive and enjoying the work that you're doing for months or even years. And it is very prevalent in this industry because not only does work make high demands on us, but you make big demands on yourself. So I know we're both saying this with the hope that you will avoid it. You're going to experience it, but hopefully by hearing this and by learning about those experiences, you'll notice it early enough that you can avoid the worst effects. Be good to yourself, be mindful and care, and watch out for workplace experiences that things that lead to burnout are work that is not motivating, fulfilling, very long hours, little opportunity for break, and low recognition and transparency. So watch out for that. Don't let yourself be knocked out. It's not, we need you here. We need fresh minds and fresh ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too. And also, I guess to tack on to that, it's nice to also remember that the reason for crunch isn't necessarily always going to be on you and not being able to get work done. It's also like a combination of, for example, how well planned for example, feature is supposed to have been planned out for, how much risk, I guess, you were able to foresee. For example, if like there was something that might cause a really big bug, maybe if you were able to point that out earlier, before production, for example, then you could avoid having to deal with that bug in like a deadline, right? And as Ted mentioned before, it's also very much on production as well to be able to schedule that reasonable deadlines for milestones, to help mitigate that kind of crunch, especially towards a deadline. There was one other thing. But yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah, basically, crunch is not just you, but you need to be aware of crunch, and to take active steps to like try to mitigate it as much as possible, because it will happen. We just don't want it to happen so much that it's the norm and that it's taking people out.
If you ever do remember that last thing that you wanted to say, please do let me know, and I can be sure to let you finish with your thought.
For sure, thanks.
Regarding the book by Richard Lamarchand, The Playful Production Process, it is required reading for us. We quite it for our one of our classes. So I am wearing my USC Games shirt right now. Really great book. Oh, I think Ted has a copy. There we go. That's the one. Highly, highly, highly recommend. It makes being a producer a lot better of an experience, and it makes for really good production practices. The production advice in the engineering panel, that's game dev. But good advice all around. For my next question, I'd like to ask, what advice do you have for somebody who isn't sure if they want to be an engineer versus a designer or the other way around? We actually had a question like this yesterday during the design panel, so this feels relevant.
Jessica, you want to start?
Sure. I think for now, as unhelpful as this might sound, just go with whatever you're more comfortable with first. And that will get you, or gives you more of a chance to get your foot in the door into the game dev industry. Because from my experience, at least, if you ever find that you want, or you feel like you're gonna enjoy design more than engineering, for example, as long as you're in that job and you've talked to people on design, if you've made like connections with them, then you're a whole lot more like you have the opportunity to be able to like transition that discipline. Is that easy? No. It's not easy, but I think either way there's opportunities either for you to you can either like just transition over, or you can employ like your design knowledge to your everyday day-to-day engineering work. If you, for example, work in gameplay or design and or what's it called, tech design. And I guess it'd be easier to transition from engineering to tech design than engineering to design fully, but yeah, I would say get your foot in the door first and go from there.
Yeah, I hate to agree, but I agree. You should, especially for your first job, you need to pick one area, because no one's going to want, some magical multi-composite person, except for very small indie teams, to come on in. What they want is someone they can throw at tasks and start learning on. And that will lock you in for a couple years, but that's fine. Find opportunities within whatever discipline you go with to also work on things that are close to the other disciplines you care about. And eventually what you'll be able to do is craft your own role, whether that is a formal like tech design role or something a little more unique in a smaller studio. You'll build that out. I've always billed myself as a programmer / designer. Actually, now I just call myself a games person, because I also done production, I've done art, I've done audio. But as much as I like being broad, you're going to need to sell yourself as a product to your first companies. And for those first few jobs, you probably won't have a lot of choice about what you're doing. You're going to find that, you're going to build it out. It gets easier as you go on, and then you're able to start pivoting. Realize though that that may have consequences in terms of salary, what type of work you're doing, or you might be starting off as a junior, or in the same position. But you'll have that experience about building games. You'll also pick up other knowledge about those other areas by working with those people. My experience was graduated with my comp sci / design degree, went into companies and was paid to be an engineer for 3.5 years and could not pivot for the life of me. So what I ended up doing was I went full indie for a couple years, got to do a lot more design work, and then came back into it with a more like a field engineer position, as well as having full stack engineering background. Now here at Meta, although my role is primarily helping people with technical stuff, I'm also one of our go-tos for design inflection. And so you will build your own path. Just don't worry. Your career is not a sprint. It's a long, long marathon. You'll have time to explore it fully.
So I think with that, we can transition over to some audience questions. And then if we have time, we can roll back around to a few more questions from our list. For the first audience question, we have, how much of the game engineering experience involves writing source code versus visual scripts? And how often would you see kind of designers going into that? I think this actually correlates very well with what our current question is. So how much of that is source code versus visual scripting? I think it's a nice little question that covers everything.
That is super role dependent. I think, the closer you are to gameplay, the more likely, depending on what engineering you're working in, we'll go back to fundamentals here, right? Separation of layers. You have your engine, thing that runs the game. Then you have the game itself. Ideally, those two things are separate. It's not always the case, especially, in older days, but generally that's true. And like nowadays, even like scripting actually is usually just code. Like if you're working in Unity, what you're doing there is you're writing primarily gameplay scripting code on top of engine code that you can't even look at unless you pay a huge amount of money. With Unreal, you have direct access to the source. You might be in there doing modifications to your title. Probably not early on, though. That'll probably be with the more senior folks. And so learning that stuff is really cool. But you'll probably be working mostly in either high-level gameplay code, or you'll be working in things like Blueprint. So it depends on what you want to do. If you are really interested in like graphics coding or deep systems engineering or feature development, you're going to be doing a lot more direct source code. If you're more interested in gameplay and feel and like integrating existing things, you'll probably be a little higher level. Get familiar with both. And remember, it's not a question about like which language should I learn, what tools should I focus on. It's being able to be flexible, have those fundamentals, and like know what tool is best for what job. Okay. Especially, since I've come up, it went from a period where like writing your own engine for a project was like pretty common, whereas now people don't do that unless they are either incredibly masochistic or they want to productize the engine itself. And so that divide has grown massively.
Yeah, I agree with those. I would also say, at least on the designer question, in terms of them dabbling in source code, I don't, from my experience at least, they don't necessarily go in to change the source code. They will, however, on occasion go in to kind of understand how, for example, the switches that get set up for them work behind the scenes. So like, for example, let's say Unity, right? You have the Unity inspector, and then they have like you can set up like custom variables that you can just adjust, right? Designers will usually just go use that, but if there's something that's maybe like more nuanced, or if they're trying to solve a bug or whatever, they'll go into the C# and they'll be like, okay, how is the code for this switch actually working? Will they touch it? That depends on the designer, but most likely no. But yeah, that's at least from my experience.
I saw someone in chat say, oh, there's at least one person making an engine at my school. Absolutely make an engine once if it interests you. Do it. It's fun. Realize that what you're going to be building is going to be like very specific for the project that you're building, and that's fine. Because to build a full featured engine is a massive undertaking that takes a whole lot of people and a whole lot of time. But do it. Always explore to understand it. Realize though that like if you're at a company and their first thought for their new game is we're going to build an engine, that is a very questionable thing to do. Although if it's big enough company, enough money, great. If you're foundational on that, you have job security for a long time.
Engine programmers will always be needed. One of the classes I'm trying to decide whether to take this final year is on game engines. So it's a tough class, but it might be worth it.
I'm not sure what your final project looked like. My final project, we had to build a game from scratch. We were allowed to use one piece of middleware, and that was it. And we had 6 months to do it, and it was a lot of fun. And it taught us all sorts of bad practices because we had to cobble together an engine over the course of like 3 months to actually start working on the game. But yeah, it's absolutely worth doing. But it goes in the kind of thing where like you should understand how an engine works so that you can understand how an engine works.
I think we've got time for one. We got time for one more question, and then we'll have or 2 more questions. For this question, it's about version control. That question is, how is version control organized and managed for a game's lifecycle? Are there a set of centralized branches, or does the team use a software, or does this also vary from team to team?
It varies massively from team to team. Everyone has their favorites. I will say, there's some like very expensive ones that, like Alien Brains, for example, that's like fantastic for collaboration cross discipline. You'll probably live most of your life in Git, at least for the next couple of years, and that's fine. You won't even really have to know how to deal with it, because if you're working at a large enough company, they'll just tell you how to commit, and someone else will do the merging for you. But how it's organized is incredibly specific per company, and like who has access is specific per company. It gets more complex when you have like build machines involved, because you can make sure things go to the right channels. So just one of the things you should learn early on: how do I commit and check out code, and like, are there safeties in place to make sure that I don't check out or commit something that I shouldn't? Find that out.
Yeah, I agree. It's also really hard to, I guess, answer this question without going into specifics of company secrets. But I will say that all the disciplines do use some kind of version control, and I think it's really good to learn multiple versions of version control if you're able. I do know like it is free, but like for example, if you were to use Perforce, then you're a little bit more paywall blocked there. But if you're able to, like through your program funding, etc., do it, try it out. There's a lot of different nuances with all of these different version control systems that I think is worth learning. And I guess learn how to deal with merge conflicts. I think that would also be a really important lesson.
Well, yeah, the first question you should ask once you know what your version control is how do I roll back errors, and how do I go through a merge in a way that's intuitive, that I won't break things. At one of my early jobs, we had a sombrero called the build break sombrero. And if you broke the build, you had to wear the sombrero until someone else did it. It moved around very quickly. Things break all the time. Learn how to fix it. And I can be public just as an example of how things are different wherever you are. I've had teams that were nothing but Git. I've had teams that were nothing but Tortoise. I've had Alienware solutions, and then Metas is very publicized. We have a single giant source repository managed through Mercurial, which we built. And like every game that we work on, every like Facebook's in there, Instagram's in there, all in one giant place. So it's very easy to accidentally pull down way more than you need. So just ask early, ask often, and find out what the tools are and how to use them.
Version control is one of those things where you don't realize why you have it until you make a bad mistake, and then you really, really never forget it. And yeah, that was a good question because I don't think we had a chance to go over it, but it's also very important. We do have a banter question of least favorite programming language before we officially wrap it up.
For me, probably Haskell, just because it's so different than everything else, and it doesn't have a lot of good uses. And the only time that I've seen someone use it was they were like, "We're going to do entirely functional based programming for our backend." I'm like, "Cool, cool, cool." So you just wanted to use it because you're the one who knows how to use it well, and like this could all be rewritten in C++. Yay!
I actually kind of forgot about Haskell until you mentioned it, because the only time I've ever used it was for a single class, and I think it was computer architectures back in undergrad, and I have not seen it since. I didn't enjoy it either. I think assembly might be my arch nemesis for
Oh
this.
gosh.
I gladly don't have to dabble in any of that, but that class was a struggle for me.
I will say, like, going back to like knowing what tools to use, like there's programming languages that I'm like, I'm gonna have to use it. But the reason you have to use it is because they're really good at what they do. So like, if you're using Java because you have to write Android native stuff, great, it's gonna do the job really well. If you have to hop into, deep C because you're doing some low-level stuff or ASM, great. If you're using Ruby, Ruby's amazing for like web protocol stuff. Like absolutely, if you're trying to build reactive applications, Ruby's gonna be the go-to. Just like, when you're building your tool set, like realize like, okay, cool, this one is also good at this job and I prefer it more to this one that I don't like.
Well, that was a very, very good question for banter purposes. For our final question, I'd like to ask, do you have any general advice you'd like to share for any students who are interested in engineering for games?
I'll pick it up to stop the awkward silence. General advice. I always say this to folks that are students. Take advantage of being a student. This is one of the few times for the foreseeable future that you have a lot of latitude in what you're building and where. As long as it fits like whatever your assignments are, like cool, you can explore different technologies, different types of games, different tool sets to do cool stuff. You can try out like some weird new thing you thought about. You can like do a deep dive in a specific algorithm and build a game around that. Because for the next couple of years, unless you are independently wealthy, you'll be working on other people's games. You'll be doing what they're asking you to do. You'll be learning what they need you to learn. And so please, please, please take advantage of this time. It's absolutely critical. And then on top of that, like, don't ever be afraid to try something new because you may never know. You don't know what you're going to grab onto. That's general. Oh, and go to game events. If you have a local meetup, if you have a conference, if you guys are, if you're on site at campus and you're in Los Angeles, lots of things happen there. Go hang out with game developers, talk to them, get to know them.
Yeah. Mine's a little bit more, I guess, on the crunch side or like work-life balance side, which I think is really important, especially going from being a student to being like an industry professional. Like, so I guess this is for people who like, which technically is most of us, or at least I hope all of us, we're doing this job because we really like the game dev industry, and that's understandable. And like, I get your enthusiasm because I'm like that too. And I really, really like this job or this line of work. But I do want to make sure that people remember to at least take a step back and make sure that you also take care of like other aspects of your own life and not just put everything into game dev. So like ideally find hobbies that take you away from the screen, whether that be like crafts or like going outside. Touch grass, I'm sorry. But I think that's going to be really important for helping you kind of avoid crunch, to see and to like see where crunch is starting to happen so that you can protect yourself more when you step out of like the safety of being a student.
I also want to take a quick moment to talk about the job hunt. So right now, folks, if you aren't aware, we're currently in a really rough economic period. And there's not a lot of jobs out there. In fact, there have been over 30,000 jobs lost in the industry. You're going to be entering this field into that. And I entered it around the same, similar situations back in 2008, 2009, when we had the Great Recession. So don't be discouraged if you're applying to a lot of positions and not hearing back. Every time you apply, that's one step towards your future job. Keep yourself motivated by doing cool stuff in the meantime. If you have to take a survival job in the meantime, okay, you have to. But it's okay. You're not alone in this. We're all going through it together. And once you land, once you land that first job, great, you're off to the races. You go from there and you keep on going. But if you need any help with that, there are lots of people who are willing to help with that.
Great closing advice. Great. Just great advice in general. Thank you both for coming by and speaking with us for the engineering panel. This is the final panel, but after this, we'll have a quick demonstration of the art show and a retrospective of previous SGDA art shows, and then our closing ceremony. Thank you to everybody for watching, and we'll see you later.
One last small comment.
Yes.
I'm going to put my website in the chat.
Yes.
I do mentorship hours every Thursday. It's only a couple blocks, but if you ever want to talk to somebody about questions about engineering or design or games or life or whatever, feel free to hit that up. I have slots available. Also feel free to say on socials. I would not be where I was today without the mentorship and just like ear of the people that listened to me when I was starting off. And I pay that forward. I encourage you to take advantage of that. And then also, once you get yourself established, do the same, pay it forward. This is a ladder. It's not an elevator. It's not a staircase. We're not crawling over people. We're helping each other up the whole way.
I think Twitch moderation might have accidentally blocked it, so I did link it in chat.
Thanks, Anuj.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, never be afraid to ask for help, because the worst they can do is say no, and the best they can do is be somebody who helps you get into the industry. Absolutely worth just sending that LinkedIn message. I know we only get like 5 a month because of outreach. I know that because of outreach this year, but definitely. So we'll see you all later.